Story 1. I had never gone camping before I was 11. I really wanted to go with my 10-year-old cousin. My parents took me to the woods and handed us the tent, a half-full bag of ranch Doritos, a pack of bratwursts, and my 7-year-old sister. Then they drove off, leaving us to camp for the first time alone in the woods with a 7-year-old. Not a fun weekend. I never went camping again, but it was apparently fine because that's how my dad and uncle learned. I'm just grateful for the lack of serial killers and black bears. Story 2. My dad was notorious for the rub dirt on it method when I got hurt as a kid. When I was 9, I was in a nasty motorcycle accident out in the desert. I broke and misplaced my fibula. The bone was protruding from my leg. My dad didn't want to end his desert trip early, so he told me not to look at it and to keep trying to walk. I was in so much pain that any time I would move, I would black out. My brother was so concerned he urged my dad that we should go home. My dad finally gave in but was so drunk, he let my 11-year-old brother at the time drive us out of the desert. He was so nervous he hit so many bumps, and each bump I would black out and then come to. Once we got home, he thought it would be best to sleep it off before going to the hospital. The next day I was admitted to the hospital, and my dad was taken into custody by Child Protective Services. Story 3. I got pregnant at 13, and my mom allowed her new husband to take me for the abortion. Then, he beat me when I got home from the procedure. She never asked who, what, or how. I had been molested since I was 4 or 5, and somewhere in my mind, I thought that sex was love. When I got pregnant again at 14, I was made to keep the baby to teach me a lesson. Again, no one asked and no one tried to educate me. Finally, at 25, my mom upset me with her cluelessness, and in a fit of rage, I blurted out examples of all the years of sexual abuse I endured, and she said, "All these years, I thought Robert had been messing with you, and that was the reason you were acting out." You guys, when I tell you that my head exploded at the same time all the air left my body, I was stunned. She thought her now ex-husband had been molesting me, impregnating me not once, but twice, yet you never asked me. For clarity, it was never my stepdad. Your desire to be married to a serial cheater was far more important than my total health. She divorced him when I was 23 because she finally caught him with his best friend's wife. That was simply too much for her to handle. This explains why she shipped my daughter and me off to my grandparents 3 months after her birth. My mom has always had an unnaturally close relationship with my oldest daughter. This conversation revealed why, for 12 years, my mom thought my daughter was fathered by her husband. Anyway, I finally learned about sex education and birth control from my 11th grade physical education teacher. She saw my miserable self and did her best to mother and educate me at every opportunity. Story 4. My dad decided to give me driving lessons when I was a teenager, which turned out to be a driving lesson singular. He took me to the parking lot across the street from our house and had me drive around to get used to the steering and pedals for about 15 minutes. Then, annoyed that I wasn't catching on fast enough for his taste, he decided we should go on the actual road, so I'd learn faster in a more challenging environment. He barked orders to speed up, slow down, hit the brakes, in an increasingly frustrated voice as I drove along, terrified I was going to hit someone. The culmination of our lesson came when he noticed we were low on gas and told me to pull into the gas station. Keep in mind, my total driving experience at this point was about 25 minutes, which did not include parallel parking. I pulled into the gas station and approached the pump at something like a 30-degree angle. He grabbed the steering wheel to correct and yelled at me, "Don't you know how to drive?" To which I said, "No, I don't. You're teaching me, remember." He drove back home silently. That was the end of Dad's driving lessons. I signed up with a driving school after that. Story 5. Doing trauma surgery. A mother decided she needed a nap and told her 15-year-old daughter to drive. The mother survived, but the daughter didn't. It was the first and most painful organ harvest I did. Story 6. Cliff jumping, 20 feet up. A girl's dad pushed her, but she hesitated and tried to stay up there but slipped. She landed on her back on a boulder from 15 feet, then into the water. "You probably just killed her," I said. Then I jumped in to do a rescue. Luckily, our lifeguard group was there doing practice rescues and even had the board. How she only survived with just bruises is a miracle. Search and rescue pulled her out the rest of the way. Story 7. Not my story, but my mom's. She developed a phobia after she was thrown into a pool to learn how to swim. At the age of 70, she still doesn't know how to. She's terrified of being on the water, even in a safety vest. Some fake clairvoyant told her she would die by drowning, so we spent our summers in the mountains as far away from water. She was thrown in the water as a child, not as a 70-year-old. Fake clairvoyant, real one, same difference, haha. Story 8. I was scared of the deep end, so my dad threw me in. My cousin parked an inflatable mattress in the corner I was in immediately. My parents supposedly yelled at him to move. He didn't. I don't know how long I was under the mattress for, but I was spitting up water and choking when I came back up. I was maybe 6 at the time. Story 9. I got stung by a bee, and my mother was convinced I was faking. At the point I started to struggle to breathe, she finally relented and made me walk to the hospital, pushing my baby brother's stroller the entire way. When I got there, the staff were horrified, rushed me in to give me an epinephrine shot, and luckily that did the trick. Many months later, a bee got into my bedroom, and my father called me a coward for coming and getting him to deal with it, instead of dealing with it myself. You have to learn how to deal with these things sometime. Or I could just ask someone not allergic to bees to come and safely deal with the bee instead of risking hospitalization. Edit. Just to address some stuff I'm getting comments on. I agree my parents were terrible and abusive for more than just this one single incident. I have had no contact for about 20 years because of the way they treated me as a child. I have countless incidents like this from both of them. This one just stood out at the time I was replying to this. Story 10. My younger cousin, who was 4 years old at the time, was a climber and always needed help getting down. His dad told his mom to leave him. He would either learn how to get down himself or stop climbing. My cousin ended up climbing onto the roof, fell off, and got impaled on a fence pole. One very expensive trip to the emergency room, and he now has a cool scar on his thigh. Edit. He did not stop climbing, he just found better ways to get off the roof. Story 11. Hurt my arm playing football during morning break at school and was sent home by the school nurse. My dad said it was fine, bandaged it, and sent me to school the next day, only for them to send me home again within an hour. My mom made my dad take me to the hospital, and my arm was broken. My wrist had split lengthways, and it was in casts for 9 months. I was secretly thrilled, to be honest, because, well, that showed him. Story 12. My father-in-law decided when his first child was born that he and his wife would not go to the baby when he started crying in the middle of the night, in order to teach him that crying doesn't get you anything in this world. Turns out, newborns need to be fed every 2 hours. So it's a good thing my mother-in-law ignored him and went to their newborn son. Otherwise, he might have died. Story 13. Ignore bullies and don't show a reaction. When they're bored, they'll stop. Completely false. And you wonder why I hate going to school so much, mother. It's not a wonder that when I went to secondary school, I made a motto of don't stand for anyone's nonsense. I went through too much of this for anyone else to do the same. Ironically enough, there are studies that state that the trauma from childhood bullying lasts for the rest of one's life, so I'm pretty much set. Story 14. When I got my very first period, my family made a trip to the pool the next day. My mom shrugged it off and told me, "You don't bleed when you're swimming," and never said another word about it. I spent the entire time taking trips to the bathroom. Story 15. I was volunteering at a parent-child zoo day and saw a few parents like this. The zoo had some free-roaming peacocks, and it was awful how many parents just didn't tell their young children that they can be mean. So the little toddler goes, "Wow, pretty bird," and tries to get a closer look, only to get chased and attacked by this creature while the parents watch. Most of them said something like, "You should have known better. How if you never teach them?" The child can barely walk, and you expect them to remember that some animals have a strong territorial sense? Then your baby gets terrorized by this creature that's bigger than them and looks like an alien for all they know, and you don't even give them a hug? See also, That one mom we had to kick out of the zoo because she was encouraging her kids to antagonize the llama in the hopes it would spit on them. Yikes, people, have some empathy for tiny humans who trust you implicitly with their well-being. Story 16. When I was about 5 or 6, I was very sick with the flu. Fever, vomiting, sweating, congestion, it was awful. There was some mix-up at the pharmacy, and they thought I was my father and gave him adult medication, basically these giant horse pills. Now, normal child medication for things like this is syrups and chewable tablets for obvious reasons. My dad comes home and tells me I have to take these meds. I have a hard time getting them down, almost choking a few times. My dad got frustrated and literally started shoving these huge pills down my sore throat with his angrily shaking fingers. I started crying. My nose was stuffed, so I could only breathe through my mouth. I remember my dad's wedding ring banging against my teeth, eyes watering, gasping for air while looking at my mom for help. Eventually, I coughed it back up, crying and throat on fire. I remember my mom demanding an apology from my dad, who just said, "Well, he's going to have to learn to take pills like that sometime anyway," and stormed off. I haven't thought about that story in over 20 years. Story 17. My stepmom walked us, me, sister, and brother, aged 10 to 12, deep into the woods and left us there to learn survival skills. We thought we were all out on a hike. Then she distracted us and ran away. We wandered into camp hours later. We knew how to get back but searched for hours, worried that something had happened to her. She was drinking margaritas and smirking. Edit. Thank you all for the smiles and awards. I freaking love the wilds of Reddit. Story 18. My dad and I once witnessed someone who literally did this for a little 3-year-old girl. This little girl was just playing at the edge of the pool, happily minding her own business when her dad ran up behind her, picked her up, and tossed her screaming as far as he could into the deep end of the pool while yelling, "Time to swim, honey." At first, my dad and I didn't react because my dad has done this to me as a game. I learned to swim first. But we started to notice that she was struggling to surface while her dad just watched. My dad nervously asked, "Can she swim?" To which the guy just shrugs and says, "She'll figure it out." I have never seen my dad move so fast to get in the water as I did that day. He quickly got the kid out of the water and started screaming at the guy about what kind of idiot he was while the girl was just bawling her eyes out. I swear my dad was ready to hit the guy. This was back in the 1990s, so we didn't have a cell phone to call the police, but we never saw them again after. It was the first time in my life I had seen insane parenting, and to this day, it freaks me out that some people will still do this. Story 19. 2 days after I graduated high school, I came home to an empty house, all my stuff in a U-Haul because my mom and stepdad moved without me. I have been financially independent ever since, but a heads up would have been nice. Edit. I woke up so grateful for all the love this post is getting. To make some clarifications, my real dad was not involved in this situation. He was on the other side of the country. I am still close with him, but he is very low income, so he could not help me in this. I went no contact with my mom for about a year, but she weaseled her way back in. I think I see her in person once every 2 years, and I do not acknowledge my stepfather exists. I have been considering going no contact with my mom again recently. Story 20. I actually used to be a swim teacher in college, teaching private lessons in people's backyards because of parents who had thrown their kids into the pool to sink or swim. It was usually mothers calling me for help because they heard from a friend of a friend that I was able to teach their child and get them to like the water again in about a month or less. One kid, he was 7, I had to sit with him on the pool deck the whole first lesson and bring buckets of water to him. His father had dumped him multiple times and insisted that his son would just figure it out eventually because that's how he learned. Needless to say, he was never home when I was there. The mother had me come while the father was at work. For weeks later, she had me come later in the afternoon so he would come home towards the end of the lesson. His father saw his son swimming and cried happy tears. He had no idea I had been there 3 days a week for a month. My favorite student was a 70-year-old man who wanted to do a triathlon but never learned to swim because his father threw him in as a child. Took about 3 months total, a lot of hand-holding on the steps and shallow end, but he finally achieved his goal and I got to cheer him on at the finish line. I still remember how each of my students clung to my arms and clawed at my neck in their first lessons. I never dunked or forced anyone out of their comfort zone. My lessons had to be customized for each student to keep it fun and relaxing. The trauma in their eyes was haunting, though. It stayed with me, and I never force anything on my kids that they aren't ready to do. It's about trust, not force. Story 21. My brother and I are 7 years apart. When he was 16 and I was 9, he taught me how to box by putting a hockey helmet on me and beating me up. I'm reasonably certain I was concussed, and I suffered horrible migraines from that day well into my 20s.